Hello nerds, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be a reading list for Babel by R.F. Kuang. Maybe let's start that again. Hello nerds, welcome back to my channel. Today's video, I'm very excited for this, is going to be a reading list of 5 books that I think you should read alongside R.F. Kuang's Babel. If you have not read this book, what are you doing? It's literally so good. If I could have rated it 6 stars, I would have. This is one of those books that I think everybody should read at least once in their lifetimes. The books that I'm recommending, you can read them before you pick up Babel, you can read them after you pick this book up, you can tandem read them with this book. It really does not matter how you go about it. But I do think that reading them will give you a more well-rounded understanding of what R.F. Kuang is doing with this book. Now, there's already so many reading lists out there that tackle the fantasy side of things and the dark academia side of things. So I'm not going to do that today here because even if I tried, like the ones that people have already made, I could never top those. So what I wanted to do instead was to give you some book recommendations that tackle the political themes within Babel. Although I do have one dark academia rec, and it's actually the first one I'm going to start with. So without further ado, let's just jump right in. If you don't know what Babel is about, let me give you a really super duper quick summary of the book. It is set in early 19th century at Oxford University, and our main character is a young boy named Robin Swift. Orphaned by cholera in Canton, Robin is brought to London by the mysterious Professor Lovell. There, Robin trains for years in Latin, Ancient Greek, and Chinese, all in preparation for the day he'll enroll in Oxford University's prestigious Royal Institute of Translation, also known as Babel, and this here is the Tower of Babel. Babel is the world's center for translation and, more importantly, magic. Silverworking, the art of manifesting the meaning lost in translation using enchanted silver bars, has made the British unparalleled in power as the arcane craft serves the Empire's quest for colonization. For Robin, Oxford is a utopia dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge. But knowledge obeys power, and as a Chinese boy raised in Britain, he realizes serving Babel means betraying his motherland. As his studies progress, Robin finds himself caught between Babel and the shadowy Hermes Society, an organization dedicated to stopping imperial expansion. When Britain pursues an unjust war with China over silver and opium, Robin must decide: can powerful institutions be changed from within? Or does revolution always require violence? And the full title of Babel is actually Babel, or The Necessity of Violence, an Arcane History of the Oxford Translators' Revolution. So you can expect violence and revolution and tragedy within this book. That is not a spoiler. Speaking of spoilers, though, I'm going to try and be as spoiler-free as possible, but it's kind of hard to predict what people are going to take as a spoiler or not, so I'm warning you in advance, I will be reading a few quotes from Babel, but I've chosen ones that I don't think are going to be very spoiler heavy, so proceed with caution. My first recommendation is going to be an iconic example of dark academia, one that also touches on the power of language and shows how solidarity is essential for enacting change in a harmful system. And that is Dead Poet Society. You can watch the movie or you can read the book adaptation of the movie written by N.H. Kleinbaum. I prefer the movie, but the book is still really great if you want to have a physical copy of all of the amazing quotes throughout the story. It's set at Welton Academy, a school for all boys that is very stuck in its traditional ways and frowns down upon students who try to break away from the status quo. Enter a new English professor, John Keating, who is played by Robin Williams in the movie, and he's a flamboyant, poetry-loving teacher who teaches his students about individuality, living life to the fullest in every single moment, and the freedom to choose your own path in life. The main characters of this book discover that their teacher used to be a part of this secret society called Dead Poet Society, and they decide that they are going to resurrect it. At their secret meetings, they recite poetry, work on their own creative writing, and just discover what it means to be a free spirit. But they soon realize that their new freedom can have some seriously tragic consequences. Some of my favorite quotes come from the movie, and I want to share with you one right now that I think is relevant. Boys, you must strive to find your own voice, because the longer you wait to begin, the less likely you are to find it at all. Thoreau said, most men lead quiet lives of desperation. Don't be resigned to that. break out. And Babel also has so many iconic quotes as well. Also, fun fact, John Keating is loosely based on the real-life poet John Keats. He was an English poet, and his poem Ode to a Nightingale is quoted in chapter 24 of Babel, I think. And this quote kind of works to link the tragedies that happen in both the Dead Poet Society and in Babel. So obviously I'm recommending Dead Poet Society because it fits into the same genre as Babel, both being dark academia, but the similarities between the two run a lot deeper. One of those similarities is that in both books there's a revolution of sorts. The revolution in Babel is obviously on a much, much larger scale, but the themes of the necessity for community and solidarity are prevalent in both books. There's a really moving scene at the end of Dead Poet Society where the main characters all stand on their desks in their classroom to protest. And I'm not going to tell you what they're protesting because, again, I want to keep this as spoiler-free as possible. But it is just such a powerful scene, and I love it so much, and there's a very similar one that happens in Babel. The factory laborers who live in the Oxford community stand in solidarity with the protesters of the Hermes Society at one point, and they're all protesting the silver industry. On their own, neither group is strong enough to change the status quo, but when standing together in community and solidarity, great change is open to happening. Community is key for revolution. You cannot mobilize to change systems of oppression without having a community to provide support, not only in numbers, but also in spirit and encouragement. What a sight, this influx of defenders to the tower. The barricades had the peculiar effect of building community. They were all comrades in arms behind those walls, no matter their origins. My next recommendation is actually just a single chapter from within Robin Wall Kimmerer's Braiding Sweetgrass, and it's called Mishkos Ken Omagwin, The Teachings of Grass. I'm so sorry if I butchered the pronunciation of that. And there's a free PDF online that I will link in the description. It's super easy to access and read. I've only read segments of this book, including the chapter that I'm recommending, but as a whole, the book is about Indigenous scientific knowledge and teachings through the ideas that plants and animals are actually our biggest teachers and we can learn so much from them. The specific chapter that I'm recommending, Mishkos Kinomagwen, pairs really well with Babel because it will completely reframe your idea of what academic knowledge sharing and data collection can look like using Indigenous teaching. Think about your typical academic article and how it's structured. They're almost always formatted in the exact same way. Introduction, literature review, thesis, methods, results, discussion, and conclusions. This chapter is written using that academic article structure, but it breaks every rule about academic writing that exists, even down to the article's acknowledgments and works cited or bibliography. Let me read you Mishkos Kenomagwen's introduction. You can smell it before you see it, a sweetgrass meadow on a summer day. The scent flickers on the breeze, you sniff like a dog on a scent, and then it's gone, replaced by the boggy tang of wet ground. And then it's back, the sweet vanilla fragrance beckoning. And that's it. That's the entire introduction. Very different to what I'm sure you're used to reading in school, right? The literature review is actually one of my favorite parts within this chapter, which is crazy because I hate reading and writing literature reviews. It is the bane of my existence. I find them so boring and they make me want to bang my head against a wall, but not this one, and I promise you will enjoy it as well. Typically, in a literature review, we expect the author to list all relevant sources and explain their significance to the research. They're basically a critical analysis or summary of all the existing research that has been completed on the topic in question. Kimmerer's literature review is so unique. It's about a single person, an elder named Lena, and I think she's from the Potawatomi Nation. Kimmerer follows Lena through a field of grass, and they converse not only with each other, but also with the grass itself. It's so cool. Babel has super informative commentary on colonization and the theft of knowledge from people of color within the academic world. If you think that you'll identify with this commentary, I guarantee that you'll really enjoy reading Mishkos Kenomagwen, the chapter in Braiding Sweetgrass. It will also help you to decolonize your academic mind. English did not just borrow words from other languages, it was stuffed to the brim with foreign influences, a Frankenstein vernacular. My next recommendation is actually not a book, it's a speech that was given by Jamaica Kincaid called The Flowers of Empire. And again, there's a free PDF online that you can easily access, and I'm going to link it in the description for you. It's a speech about the British Empire's need to isolate and possess, through theft, things and people from around the world that don't belong to them, specifically with reference to plants and greenhouses. The creation of botanical gardens, like the creation of the Tower of Babel in R.F. Kuang's book, is rooted in the colonial expansion project of the British Empire. The empire would go to foreign lands, steal exotic plants that they've never seen before, and bring them back to Britain, where they'd then keep them inside glass enclosures and basically put them on display as if it's like a zoo. The British took foreign lands, and therefore foreign peoples, and turned them into commodified objects used for profit, but the only people who would profit were the British Empire and not the people that they were stealing from. In Babel, there's also a commodified object, and that is foreign language, a language that is not the English language. In Jamaica Kincaid's speech, this commodified object is foreign plants. I think when we hear the word colonialism, our minds automatically go to colonialism in its biggest form, the widespread theft of land and the forced removal of native inhabitants of that land. But pretty much everything, from the biggest parcels of land down to the smallest plants and the smallest characters within a language, have roots in colonial expansion. And both Babel and The Flowers of Empire illustrate that idea beautifully. Another similarity between these two texts is the way that Kincaid and Babel's main character Robin perceive themselves as people of color within a very white European landscape. Kincaid says, "I thought of myself as more like them than like the Africans I did resemble in a physical way." And this quote reminds me so much of Robin. Throughout most of Babel, Robin really struggles between conflicting emotions. On the one hand, he's extremely angry at Richard Lovell from stealing him from his motherland and forcing him, basically, to become a translator for Oxford. And on the other hand, he's very grateful for the life that Oxford has provided him and for the community and found family that he has discovered. He very much struggles with his identity as a Chinese boy within a white European empire. We're trapped in a symbiotic relationship with the levers of power. We need their silver, we need their tools, and loath as we are to admit it, we benefit from their research. My next recommendation is How to Blow Up a Pipeline by Andreas Malm. If you couldn't tell by the title, this is also a book that is about the necessity of violence in revolution. Both this book and Babel are about the necessity of violence, but in different yet still related contexts. Where Babel is about the necessity of violence to dismantle the colonial project, How to Blow Up a Pipeline is about the necessity of violence to dismantle the fossil fuel industry. Both books relate because they both have to do with stopping an industry and an oppressive system that overexploits people and their lands. Malm says in just the very first few pages of his book, "We erect our camps of sustainable solutions. We cook our vegan food and we hold our assemblies. We march, we block, we stage theaters, we hand over lists of demands to ministers, we chain ourselves, we march the next day too. We talk of extinction and no future, and still business continues very much as usual. At what point do we escalate? When do we conclude that the time has come to also try something different? When do we start physically attacking the things that consume our planet and destroy them with our own hands? Is there a reason we have waited this long?" Both Babel and How to Blow Up a Pipeline come to a conclusion that the only route for revolutionary change might be violence and the destruction of property. The reason that I'm recommending this book to you is not just because it shares similar themes with Babel. Even though Babel is set in the early 19th century and How to Blow Up a Pipeline deals with contemporary issues in the 21st century, Colonialism and environmental degradation, among other things, are so intricately connected across space and time. And I believe that to dismantle something as pervasive and globally oppressive as colonialism, we must also dismantle systems of racism, sexism, classism, environmental degradation, capitalism, and so on. The list continues. To dismantle something like colonialism, oppressed groups must find ways to support one another's causes, even if they do have their differences. And I think Babel does a really great job of showing how this can be done. There's two groups in the book: the Hermes Society and the factory workers who continue to strike. At first, they seem to be each other's enemies, but then you realize that they are fighting for the same cause, dismantling the silver industry, albeit they're doing it for very different reasons. Hermes's reason is to put an end to the empire's colonial expansion project, and the laborers' reason is to put an end to automation, which is causing mass unemployment and therefore widespread poverty in Oxford. We have to realize that our common enemy is not each other, but the systems that are hurting all of us. This kind of ties into what I was talking about earlier with Dead Poet Society, that community is key for revolution, and just to build a little bit more off of that, so is intersectionality. For revolutionaries, violence tends to be a last resort after they've exhausted every other possible option. In Babel, Griffin says to Robin, "Violence shows them how much we're willing to give up. Violence is the only language they understand because their system of extraction is inherently violent. Violence shocks the system, and the system cannot survive the shock. You have no idea what you're capable of truly. You can't imagine how the world might shift unless you pull the trigger." Is violence a necessary evil? The last book that I want to recommend is John Locke's Second Treatise of Government. Again, you can find free PDFs online, although they might show up as an alternative title, something like The Two Treatises of Government, but I promise it's the same thing. Second Treatise of Government has been a very influential text for Western political theory, and therefore how Western governments and economies are organized and how they function. It was written in the late 17th century, and it has kind of become the basis for our understanding of how liberal democracies function. Liberal being the economic side of things, and democracy being the political side of things. It talks about a lot of different things, but with reference to Babel, I think the two most relevant topics would be the state of nature and the right to private property. Let's break these concepts down a little bit. The state of nature is the state in which humans find themselves before they enter into a social contract, aka a society that is governed by laws. The state of nature, therefore, has no laws, it's very brutish, and it's every man for himself, basically. Those who have power in the state of nature are simply those who are the strongest. The state of nature is already a very Western political idea, but it has been severely corrupted into thinking that any society that doesn't function with a specific type of social contract, like the one of the British Empire, is primitive and needs to be civilized. Very, very problematic thinking. This is where we get the justification for cultural colonialism, the erasure of a people's practices and values, and the replacement of those with ones within the dominant society. In Babel, the students of color are perceived as being civilized because they were raised in a civilized society, and their motherlands are viewed as being barbaric, simply because they don't fall into the social contract that the British Empire works under. Now let's look at the right to private property. Locke said that if you put your labor into something, you now own that thing. Example, let's say I have a farm and so does my neighbor Susie. One day I decide that I really want to have some applesauce, but my farm does not have an apple tree, and so I can't do that. But Susie's farm over there, she does have an apple tree. I go over to Susie's farm and I harvest the apples from her tree. I'm sweating, my muscles are burning. This is really hard work. Then I go home and I make some applesauce. According to Locke, because I put the labor in to harvest those apples and then labored over the stove to make the applesauce, I now own not only the applesauce, but also the tree and its apples, even though they are on Susie's land. Susie's a very understanding woman. She's like, you know what? It's not a big deal that you took my apples, but in exchange, I would like to have some of that applesauce, please, and thank you. And I say, there's no way. These are my apples, and this is my applesauce. I made it, and you cannot have any. You don't get any because you didn't labor as hard as I did. This is the same messed up logic that the British Empire used to justify stealing silver from foreign lands and then not sharing any of the profits from that silver with the people that they stole it from. Locke's writing has been used for a very, very long time to justify colonial expansion and the theft of people and lands for economic profit of an empire, specifically the British Empire. Reading Second Treaties of Government will help you to recognize why the British Parliament acted the way that it did, and why characters like Richard Lovell reasoned and rationalized the way that they did. And even though reading Locke will help you to recognize how the mindsets of certain individuals and institutions were developed, it doesn't make their actions any better. In fact, it will make it all the more messed up. I don't understand how people can justify their violence like this, and neither does Robin. Never, thought Robin, would he understand these men who talked of the world and its movements like a grand chess game, where countries and peoples were pieces to be moved and manipulated at will. And on that very depressing note, we have reached the end of my reading list for Babel by R.F. Kuang. If you read any of these books, I would love to know your thoughts in the comments. Also, if you have any other recommendations that you think people should read or that I should read that I didn't talk about today, please leave them in the comments because I would love to read them. Anything that has to do with politics, I find so fascinating. It's what I majored in university, so of course that rings true. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. I had so much fun putting it together. I love making reading lists, and honestly, I think that I do want to make more videos in this realm, so if there are any books that you would like a reading list for, you can also leave that in the comments, and I will see if I can do that. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it so much, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.